Hello, everyone. I'm about to turn on my camera and stop screen sharing. Hopefully, you can hear me and see me. And I am here with Megan-Brette Hamilton. We're here for DEI Speech IQ. It's been a minute. It's been a month. We did not do anything during Better Speech Language Hearing Month. Better.
Fit to National Speech Language Hearing Month.
Thank you.
Took out the better.
National Speech Language
Yes.
Hearing Month. Yes.
Yes.
So didn't do any podcast for that, but I am glad that we are back close to Juneteenth, pre-Juneteenth, as my husband says. It's not Juneteenth yet, but listen, we need more than a day, obviously, to reminisce and remember that, they those before us definitely paved the way for us to be okay when we are here now and be okay with whatever here is.
Paved
So
the way for us to
cheers
be
to
okay.
you. Thank you so much. I know you got a lot to do.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you said yes to participating today. I am hoping that we're on LinkedIn, etc. And I wanted to, of course, introduce you to our listeners.
Awesome.
And so I'm going to pull up your your bio, which again, yes, listen, hey, to be honest, audience, if you're listening, I dropped the ball and did not. I followed up, but not fully followed up. So let's bear with me. Bear with me. It's okay.
Future, never be afraid to nudge someone. Never, because it's not personal if you don't follow up on what you're supposed to.
I was like, I don't know. It's just 2 days. I'll be okay. We'll know who she is. So I have a bio. So I'm really honored to have you here. Megan-Brette Hamilton, Dr. Megan-Brette Hamilton, is the Chief Staff Officer for Multicultural Affairs and a certified speech language pathologist at the American Speech Language Hearing Association, where she oversees ASHA's Office of Multicultural Affairs. ASHA prevent professional development and the continuing education and convention and meeting teams. So sorry for all the slow reading here. Dr. Hamilton was, previously an SLP in New York City, K through 12 schools, an academic professor and a qualitative researcher. She has published, presented, trained, and consulted on topics of African American English and culture-centric, linguistically responsive practices for teaching and assessing literacy skills and effective communication across a variety of audiences. Dr. Hamilton sits on the advisory boards for Maryland Initiative for Literacy Equity, MILE, and the National AI Institute for Exceptional Children. Dr. Hamilton is also former host and producer of the Honey Bean Connection podcast by MB, it says, and owner, Megan-Brette, I'm sure, and owner of Megan-BretteHamilton.com. So welcome, of course. I know that there's much more to your story than just a very, very brief bio. I don't know how long you've been in the field, but I feel like we're in similar years. But tell our audience, I was going to say your audience, but tell our audience a little bit about how you got here as far as, your own story and, a little more of your journey.
Yes. So my journey started a long time ago. And I went to Hampton University. So I am wearing my I Love HU shirt.
There you go.
Word to Harvey. And I started off as a broadcast journalist major. I was a broadcast journalist major maybe for 3 months. And then someone down the hall, her name was Sharon, she was taking these courses in communication sciences and disorders. And it seemed awesome and amazing. And I spoke to my Aunt Frida about it because she was someone who I felt like, oh, I think this is similar to what she's been talking to me about. And I said, Aunt Frida, I think I want to do this major. She's like, Maggie, she called me Maggie Meg. This is what I've been doing my whole life. Like, this is what I told you should do. I said, oh, this is it. So 3 months, changed my major, and I have never looked back, perfectly honest. So got my bachelor's at Hampton University, and then ended up getting my master's at University of Maryland. And I actually had this other part of me too, though. I studied abroad in France in undergrad, so I like graduated kind of that weird semester late. So I graduated December 99. So I had 6 months before my master's program, and I needed to do something with my 6 months. So I moved to LA and did acting. And I absolutely loved it. And I did acting in France. So it was just kind of something that I realized I love to do. And so I get to my master's program and I'm loving it and I'm excited. And I go to my first ASHA conference and I see one of my former professors, Dr. Robert Screen. And he said, Megan-Brette, how do you love speech language pathology? And I was like, I love it, Dr. Screen, but I feel like there's part of me that wants to do acting too. Like I don't, and he said, Megan-Brette, you have two passions. Most people don't have one. Okay, so that was huge
Okay.
because I
Okay.
was like 23 and I was like, okay, note to self, life can be and not or. So that was huge for me. So then I ended up getting my master's, moving to New York City, worked there for 10 years, worked at a SNF originally, did early intervention, but my love was the schools, K through 12. And my love of the schools was those seventh graders. Ooh, those seventh graders. You got to
That's
be a
great.
special person to work. You got to be a real special person to work with those seventh graders, to be honest.
Agreed.
Um, and I did acting there. I hosted a show on cable for 4 years. So I was able to kind of, do the and part that I wanted to do with my life. And then I had a lot of questions, but to be honest, my questions working with students was about language disorders and the brain. And I kept asking myself, if we process language differently, what makes it a disorder? I was confused, right? I was like, because so many of my students, I would bring them in and they were learning language the way they couldn't do in the classroom, but just in a different way, tactily, kinesthetically, just a lot of different ways that I would reach them and they got it. So I was having a lot of questions, to be honest. I was like, I think I need to go back to school and just ask more questions and find the answers myself because that's kind of what I want to do. So I go back there. I go back to I not go back. I go to University of Illinois to get my PhD, and I originally was going to do cognitive neuroscience. That was like my thing. And then something happened, and I started like screaming about race and talking about race and realizing that this was not a comfortable conversation for a lot of people. And so my shift went to African American English, culturally responsive practices, cultural linguistic diversity. It just kind of shifted. And that's where I found myself.
Wow.
Graduated from there, went to Auburn University, taught there for 6 years. Yeah. And then after that, got a notification that the CEO was going to not be in her old position. It was, kind of brought upon me that I think you should apply. It was told, I think you should apply. And I said, you know what? This is a chance of a lifetime. This job isn't going to open up anytime soon in my career. So I applied. And now here I am 2 years later.
Right? Yeah, no, that job does not open up very often. So,
It hasn't.
so
Nope.
God willing, you will be there for a while also, and then we can grow and learn together as we do.
I
But
like it.
yes, so you were in the 90s with me, so definitely with similar years of graduation in speech pathology, at least in the beginning, not in the
Yes.
doctorate side of things. So congratulations to you, of course.
Thank you.
I feel like my video, by the way, so anybody who's watching this, my video may have stopped. So I've got a very odd face on. So the issue here is that I'm probably opening up too many windows on my laptop. So I'm gonna close those
Mm.
down, just checking to see if everybody could see us. But now I'm gonna let that go, let it go. Whatever happens, happens there. So
Well, the
hopefully you can
picture
still
did
hear me.
change now. You changed. So we had a little bit, but now it's stuck again.
It's
Okay, wait, wait.
being very odd. So I'm closing even more windows. Don't worry. It'll eventually, hopefully, catch up with my voice. Um,
Nice.
so yes, so you were a neighbor in New York City with me. I didn't
Oh,
even know,
yes. I know. I was working in
right?
Brooklyn. Loved it. I worked in
That's
Queens for my first 2 years, and then
see,
I moved over to Brooklyn. But I ended up hitting all boroughs. I ended up working in all different boroughs. Most of my time was in Brooklyn.
yeah, yeah. I think Well, did you work in Staten Island?
I did. I did. There was a summer I would take the ferry to Staten Island for the summertime. It was I don't even know how many summers I did it, but it was just a summer gig. It wasn't, year round. But I did.
Okay, so
I took the ferry in.
right, so you legitimately did work in all boroughs
I
because
told
sometimes
you. I
Staten
said
Island
it. I'm
gets
not crazy.
very gets forgotten. Let's just say it gets forgotten.
Understood. I have a lovely story about Staten Island working in Brooklyn that I will never forget it. Um, I had a teacher tell me, please work with this kid. He's got speech and language issues. Please, please, please. And I pulled him and, did a little screening and it's like, he sounds fine to me. And so I was like, where are you from? And he's like, I'm from Staten Island. And so I went back and I told the teacher, I was like, I don't see any issues. He's communicating well with me. He's from Staten Island. She goes, is that what the problem is? I go, problem.
It's not a problem, exactly.
No, it's
It's
not.
it's it's a good thing. It's a good
Yes,
thing.
yes,
So yeah, I know accents can be one of those things that throw some people off. So I know
yes,
that happens.
yes.
Other than my video throwing myself off here again. Sorry once more, but hopefully people will see you perfectly clear the whole time because you seem clear to me.
Okay.
It's
Well,
obviously
I feel like I'm moving according to the way I'm moving.
you want
So
to, exactly.
yes, yes.
So, and that's, hey, part of this technology version of life. So
Yes,
when
yes,
I think you told us a lot about how you heard about the field of speech pathology. So
yes.
I was wondering though, of course, um, you started getting into your diversity side of things.
Mhm.
So when you are at least when you had, kind of decided on diversity, in what ways, and again, this is kind of like the version of what did you notice? When did you
Mhm.
notice it? And and have some things changed or stayed the same, positives or negatives on
Mhm.
DEI. This is DEI Speech IQ. So, want to make sure
Yes,
that
yes.
we're aware.
Ah, so here's interesting, and I can only speak from my experience, right, and not try and paint things with a broad, paintbrush.
Mm-hmm.
But I went to an HBCU, and when I went there, not all of my professors were Black, but most of them were. And Dr. Robert Screen, who's pretty huge in our field, he was one of my professors. He was the chair of the department at the time. He wrote a book on multicultural, I can't remember the name right now, but multicultural populations in CSD. So we were told about it. It was part of the conversation. It wasn't an asterisk of the conversation. It wasn't like the joke I used to make is like, week 14, slide 10, let's talk about, culture and differences. So it was part of just kind of what we did. I remember I even was part of Ronald McNair program and we did some research about it. And so I talked about, the disparities and and families and just equitable access to care. So we talked about this, and this was the 90s. And so it wasn't weird for me to talk about it. It wasn't weird to learn about. We have such terminology history. So I don't know if we were calling it Black English back then, but we have such, all these different ways that we called the same concepts. But I remember that it was known to me. I understood it. It wasn't weird. So it made sense to me. And that was undergrad. And then I think what's interesting though about your question is, when did I notice it? There's so many different aspects to notice it from, right? So my first time noticing it at Hampton was not the people in the profession or in the pipeline, because I saw my Black professors. I saw my Black peers all around me. So there was that didn't even hit me. What hit me was what we were learning about. And I was like, oh yeah, this feels inequitable and Black English, African American English, whatever we're calling it. Yeah, we got to learn about this, da da da. So then I go to get my master's and I'm the only Black person in the classroom. So that's when that piece starts to come in, right? And it's like, so we all didn't look like the way we looked at Hampton. Okay. Because I didn't, that was a
Right.
big surprise for me, to be perfectly honest. And then even going to my first ASHA conference, it was just kind of a big surprise and didn't realize what the field actually, looked like at that time. And still a little bit now, we've made some improvements. So there's that aspect. right? And then I actually go into my career, and there was a lot of different aspects again, just pulling from, where I went for my master's. I remember just the representation piece. Parents would see me. So most of my kids in Brooklyn were, I think they would identify themselves as Black or African American, Spanish speaking, Hispanic, Latinx, Latino, all the different backgrounds. And I do remember the parents in the IEP meetings would look at me and be very surprised. Oh, you're the speech language pathologist? Oh, you're a SLP? Oh, wow, wow. And I'm like, oh, okay. So clearly they haven't seen many people who resemble them
Okay.
in this chair, in this position. And then you would get it from the people also like running the meetings. I remember someone walked in, and I thought it was maybe my age because I felt like I was a little bit younger. And she said, "Are you Megan-Brette Hamilton?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Are you the one that writes those really amazing reports?" I said, I don't know what reports you're talking about, but if they're the ones that I submitted, then yes." So that piece. So now I'm getting like all of these different pieces of the manifestations of our field, right? And I got it when we're, working with my students. I got it I remember one of the first times there was a standardized test when I first got there, was the fourth graders taking it. And one of the questions, I was doing push-in, and one of the questions on the test was, name something you can't get from your parents. And so I think probably 95% of the kids wrote down green eyes. Well, there was a choice of 4, and it was like your height, curly hair, long fingernails, green eyes, and almost all the Black kids put green eyes. So those are the starts, and that now there's the intersection of education, right? So I think along the way, I just noticed, uh-oh.
Sorry, don't ignore that.
Okay, something just happened.
Ignore things.
Focus. Okay, so whatever, just a lot of different realms. And I think as I've gone through my career, I've noticed it in different areas. I've noticed an intersection of it. I've noticed it, from my clinical side, my service delivery, working with other professionals, representation, just so many different aspects of it.
Yes. I think it's definitely one of those things where even when you are, like you said, you went through college and you were like, I'm good. But then at one point there's always a thing that makes you say, hey, how come we're not talking more about this thing? Like this in particular, multiculturalism slash Blackness slash, cultural code switching slash ethnicity, language changes, things like that, because it feels very much, especially when you're in college, that it's really very, at least in the beginning. And now, thankfully, I do believe that it's changed a lot. I honestly do, even from comments of students, that a lot more people on lingualism, multilingualism, etc. And then make sure that students are much more cognizant, so to speak, of their what they're bringing to the table culturally. So I think that was a big aha moment for me, where I felt like, I wasn't talking about myself, or, like, and not to say that the client isn't very, very, very important, but you're part of the equation as who you are when you walk in the door, who they see, who they're responding to, what their in some ways what their anticipation is, like you said, and whether or not it's like some surprise, hey, it's a Black woman sitting in front of you, and it's really okay, like it's still okay, you're okay.
Yeah.
And not in a, not you can't, I want to say, you can't take it personally that they have not seen another Black woman at
Oh,
this,
I do
at
not.
that
Yes.
time.
I
But
I
yeah.
felt like it was such an interesting bond. Like I would get parents pulling me aside afterwards saying, "Thank you for being in the room with me. Thank you for looking at my kid differently than some other people would look at my kid," because we are who we are, and I have my own kind of personality. I can be very sarcastic. But they loved that. They loved the fact that there was someone else in the room, especially talking about their kid in a way that could feel very vulnerable and very negative for some parents and for some caregivers, and finding to have someone that maybe at least understood them in some way, shape, or form that they may not have felt otherwise. And I think what you said was interesting. I think when I used to work at Auburn, I would most of my students were white, and I would talk about culture. And I think for me, I've tried to get to the point too where we talk about it where you don't even prime the brain, where it's not like, okay, we're about to talk about race. Everybody, okay, is everyone okay? Like you start to prime the brain that we're going to be uncomfortable talking about race or gender or ethnicity or whatever. And then you've primed the brain. And so now they're like, yeah, well, this does make me feel a little uncomfortable. So I really I talk about it from day one,
Yep.
like it is the most normal thing. You're going to work with a whole bunch of different people, and they're
Right.
not always going to look like you. They're not always going to have the same background as you. It's your job to figure out if that matters and then how it matters. But I remember when I taught an introductory class. It was my first semester I taught it, and it was fine, but I did some projects and I heard from some of my students, and I was like, to make sure they know what they're in for. So the second semester I taught it, they came in and I said, if you are here to work with communication disorders, you are probably in the wrong room. I said, if you are here to work with people who might be identify as gay, identify as having schizophrenia, identify as dyslexic, having autism, live in a trailer home. Like I just named all of it, right? I said,
Right.
these people happen to have communication disorders. Then
Right.
you are in the right place.
Love
And
it.
some of the faces are kind of like, I think there's an expectation that they're going to work with people who look exactly like them, have the exact same background, have the exact same identities. And that's just not what we do.
Yes, I definitely agree. It's nice when you can talk about it as part of the conversation and not because it's something out of the ordinary, so to speak, or that it's something that you're going to have to deal with. Like
Right,
it's
right,
not, it's not a
right.
horrifying moment. It shouldn't be.
It
And like
shouldn't
I
be.
said, I do think that it's much more a consistent conversation that comes up in many different aspects of how we interact and what we bring to the table. I keep on saying this. What we bring to the table right now, I have a few students who come from different countries. And so they're bringing to the table their cultural backgrounds in particular and their language backgrounds. And sure, there's a version for them that they're learning about American culture. I definitely understand that part and whatever American culture that means. And
Exactly.
yet, because we're in New York, there should be at least a version. And again, New York, the boroughs and the outer boroughs, so to speak, but New York City, that is, and then the counties that are kind of in and around. Of course, like in particular for my students, we are pretty close to the city. But I've pretty much worked in and around the city. So it's always going to be a very diverse population, ideally, that we're working with, especially if we're working with people in their communities, and again, there are certain communities, I cannot tell a lie, that are in New York City that are still very homogeneous, and potentially, that might make, things slightly different, as in, I speak to people that are very much like me all the time, blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, as a speech pathologist, you can't bring that, like you can't bring that to the table. You shouldn't at least have that as a thing that is an obstacle. You should learn from it and learn. The lessons are always fun to learn. I think the lessons are always fun to learn, but maybe that's because I'm also an immigrant and I studied linguistics and I studied languages. And so to me, it's just a fun part of what I do.
Yeah.
So,
I
to
think,
me, yeah.
it's funny when you said the culture piece in New York and some of your students come from different countries. I think for me, it was so interesting when I started to get more into this theoretical background of it, right? Because I think I've lived it, I've lived my life, and I actually grew up in a neighborhood that was really diverse racially and ethnically.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, in my husband's military, and I remember I would hear people talk about, like cultural differences or cross-cultural communication, all of that. But oftentimes they were talking about it really across like sometimes our culture can be looked at as not cultural, but just wrong, right? It could be looked at as, like, let's take African American English, for example, right? Improper, bad grammar, all of those things, right?
Mm,
Versus cultural. And so I think I also
yeah.
I, learn how to one grasp and try and translate and explain and have discussions about what culture really means. Because
Yep.
like you said, we all have it. And I would
Yep.
talk to some of the students. I remember Illinois, I was working with a group of students. And I was like, talk to me about your culture. And they were white students, and they said to me, well, Dr. Hamilton, it's just regular. It's just like a regular. Well, they didn't say doctor at the time. So doctor.
Yep.
I said, it's regular. And I said, okay, your culture is regular. Got it. Now, if I were to tell you, though, we do not have the same culture. We do not share the same cultural background. What does that make my culture? And then, of course, they would get like slightly uncomfortable. And I was like, okay, I'm not doing it to make you uncomfortable, but I'm doing
Yeah.
it to make you understand you have a culture. And
Yeah.
just explore it and understand it and get comfortable with it. You do have
Right.
a culture, and you have more than one.
Right.
Different
Yes.
cultural.
Absolutely. And you're right, because I think, it leads to that discussion leads to saying that, for example, right now is, well, one of the things about this month is that it is LGBTQIA
Plus.
K,
Mhm.
depending on who you are and who you speak to. But again, Pride Month. And so that is a culture. It is a culture. It
Yes.
goes across
Yes.
languages,
Yes.
it goes across ethnicities, it goes
Yes.
across nationalities, it
Yep.
goes,
And it
across
should be
obviously
recognized and it should be
genders.
validated like all
Yes, it
cultures.
goes across
Recognize
genders, it goes
it
across
does.
everything. So
Yep.
absolutely. No, that's a really great point. It is not, that's
Yeah.
why I always say, like, learning about. So like I don't know what
Mm-hmm.
learning about the culture is. You always have to learn about the culture. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
always something new. And again, it's neither here nor there. I think that, it's unfortunate that the divisions were created before we were here. So that is
Mm.
where some of the history has come
Mm-hmm.
from. Hence,
Yeah.
hence what we're talking about as far as, code switching or just awareness of knowing that you have a culture too.
Yep.
Like, if you think you're part of the majority, so to speak, and
Mm-hmm.
that's and therefore other people are the minorities, then you
Mm-hmm.
think, okay, I'm in some ways the standard, right? As we've said. But again, a lot of people are using the term global majority, because the truth is, especially when we're talking about the American perspective. The version is that the American perspective is not the global perspective. And so globally, we should be viewing things differently. And I do think that the world is getting smaller thanks to social media, thanks to the internet, thanks to, frankly, the accessibility that people have to be able to move from place to place, and then be able to see how people interact in these cultures, how they communicate, because that's our area of specialty, certainly, and the ways that potentially they address when people are, so to speak, not communicating in a way that is expected. I'll say it that way. So
Yeah.
again, as we
And
go
that's
along,
context
sometimes
based.
it's positive.
That's context based, right? So you can literally be someone
Yep.
who communicates a certain way all the time. And in
Yeah.
one context, your social capital is sky high, but in another context, your social capital is lower. And I think one of the things I always try and get people to understand, I'm like, there is no one right way to communicate. There can't be. There literally cannot be, because we have so many different cultures and communication is culturally embedded. And I remember I did a talk recently, and just to take English as an example, I was like, did you guys realize there's literally over 150 dialects of English? There's 150 dialects of English, and I'm not a linguist, so I'm not going to go ahead and go back and forth between what a dialect is, but there's 150 different ways to speak English
English.
correctly. And yet, I can't even go into it, Dawn. Yet. But I think that's fascinating when people try and wrap their head around, like, hold on, wait, what? I'm like,
Yep.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
And that means
Absolutely.
that every single one of those people in those communities are
Yes.
speaking that way with their community, and it's right and it's
And it's
correct
right.
and it's
Exactly.
effective and it's
That's
their
right.
culture.
That's right. That's right. Yes. And so in many ways, it's definitely, it's when we are exploring that we start to see, like, oh yeah, this can still be okay. Like it's not just okay, it can be excellent. And so, absolutely. I think that, it's great when we it's great when we can talk more about it. And that's, I hope that the conversations go on, as we continue to build and grow in our field in speech pathology
Yeah.
and audiology. I think that those our partner fields are big, have a big need to make sure that we feel comfortable and confident in how we are approaching, like, as you said, communication in its many different forms. And definitely, making sure that this is something that doesn't stop because, for the sake of argument, we've stopped saying Black Lives Matter. And so, that's not the only version that is useful. It's one of many versions that are useful. It's one of in our field in particular is what I'm saying, because again, part of the reason why we need to keep talking about it, and we need an office of multicultural, I forget what the exact affairs is exactly, is that it continues to be an area that needs to be discussed and reinforced and broadened, frankly, so.
It's funny you say that. So when I first got to ASHA, it was, and I think it's maybe been asked before, but I can only go from my starting point. Did I want to change my title, Chief Staff Officer for Multicultural Affairs? And 2022 is when I got there, right? What year are we? 2024? Yes, 2022. So it was still around the big upswing on Chief Diversity Officer, Chief DEI Officer. It was still around that upswing where that was a lot of the positions being recruited for and being hired. And I was like, I don't want to. I am proud of the fact that this office has been around for over 50 years. I'm proud of that. And language matters. Words matter. You hear, someone even told me, they're like, oh, when I heard multicultural affairs, I was like, oh, that office has been around for a minute. Because you don't say that as much anymore, right? You would hear Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And so I like that. I think we need to all wrap our heads around the fact that we can talk about the same concept, have the same values, even when the terminology changes, because that's what's going on. Some, terminology changes and it starts to become like a trigger word for some people, and laws are getting, rewritten, and all these things are happening. And I think what's so interesting about it is, yes, we're still going to keep doing the work. The work is still going to keep getting done.
Yeah.
Change the name, you can change the word, and you can change all of that, and that's what makes some people okay, then that's fine. But we're still doing the work. I'm going to put my ASHA hat on right now. I did a webinar recently, and I can't remember the name of it, but I called it something like Redefining the Work, Passion, People, Perspective. Nowhere in there did it say DEI, right? Not in the title. It didn't say cultural responsiveness, didn't say that either. But everything I talked about was exactly what we're talking about here. You need to look at that person in front of you. You need to take note of their background, their identities. You need to respect that. You need to validate that. And you need to work with it when it matters, because it doesn't always matter. But I think understanding that this has been around, this has stayed, this isn't going anywhere, because we're people and we work with people, and we're never going to stop working with people. And people are a variety of fill in the blank.
Yes, exactly. Fill in the blank. Exactly.
Yeah.
And the truth is, this is definitely something that I think is important to continue to build, grow, and, like I said, promotes, frankly. The other, so you talked, and again, here's the deal. I'm going to say this because I know your time is precious.
I was just looking at the time. People don't know I got a plane to Greece. I got a plane to Greece.
Exactly. So I'm not trying to, I respect your time, and I want to make sure that you also understand that I respect your time. So I'm going to ask just two more questions. What project are you currently working on that you potentially want people to support you with? And then how can they reach out to you to be able to, work with you or support you in your project?
Well, I will say it's not a project I personally am working on, but it's a project that the Office of Multicultural Affairs at ASHA is working on. So we call it OMA. So we do have That's Unheard Of. If anyone doesn't know, it's a website, That's Unheard Of. And it was, I'm still new to ASHA in this respect. I want to say it was maybe 2020 when it got, I don't know, when it got launched. But I do remember using it with some of my students. So That's Unheard Of is a website where you can go and learn more about cultural responsiveness. You can kind of start wherever you are, but it's more individualized. So the new project is Have You Heard? We've kind of done a soft launch, but now that I just said it out loud, it's a little bit bigger. But it's Have You Heard is a website where we are trying to just kind of be the platform for people to come and share their DEI initiatives. So what are you doing over there at this university? What are you doing over here at this hospital? What are you doing in this school district? And is it about recruitment? Is it about retention? Is it about holistic admissions? And you share it with other people so that one, we don't always have to feel like we got to recreate the wheel, right? So here's a platform that you can share it with and be like, oh, wow, I can do that. I can tweak it a little bit here because our, class size isn't as large, or, oh, I can take this over here. So that is one of the big things that we are really excited about. We're working on. Samantha Moore was the associate director for that and the business owner. I don't know. I think Vicki Deer Williams kind of had this idea before she left this position, and it grew, and now it's grown, and now it's out there. And so I'm really excited about that.
Excellent.
And I think you had a second part, but I don't remember what your second part was.
No, that was the second part. You had it.
Okay,
it was just the contact, and then really you said, "Have you heard?" is the keyword.
Yes.
That people would go to asha.org and look for "Have you heard?" and then
yes. Well,
or
I think we're going to put it under "So Have You Heard?"
So Have You Heard?
So Have You Heard.com. If I am wrong, everyone just email me at ASHA or email multicultural affairs at asha.org.
See?
Now I can't remember this.
Exactly.
I was not prepared. Okay.
Exactly. That was the other part was the contact. So absolutely, it's definitely something that is on my radar now, and so I will also look for it because I definitely have visions and hopes for kind of projects that I'm trying to do. Things, of course, there's not enough time, never enough time to do all the things I think some of us envision would happen, but such is life. However. The last question, being that it is our pre-Juneteenth get together, is who do you identify with in regards to kind of and I'm sorry for the internet being wobbly, apparently, but who do you identify with as far as freedom and emancipation and just the concepts around, kind of the Juneteenth theme? Yes.
Okay, I did think about that one, so you send the questions ahead of time, which we appreciate. But your first part to that question was, what do you, I think, like, how do you define it or how do you describe it? And then is there a person who kind of emulates that? So it took me a while to get there. I was like, I think for me, freedom emancipation means acceptance. And I think it means it in multiple varieties, multiple layers. But one of the ones that I was honing in on was accepting who you are, living in it, like being that truth, right? Like, so this is who I am, and this is who I'm going to be. And I need to be okay with it. And whatever that looks like, right? I need to be okay with it. And then I have to be aware of it, understand it, and then to live it is true freedom. And I thought this way when I was at Auburn University. I was like, I'm not a R01 grant getter. That's not the kind of researcher I was. I was a qualitative researcher. I wanted my work to be clinically relevant at all times. I was more like this public intellectual. And once I became at peace and accepted who I was as a researcher and accepted who I was going to be as a professor, I wasn't like a lot of the professors. The students told me that all the time. Who I was as a clinician, right? I wasn't the one who's making all these really awesome, creative visual things like the other SLPs. I used like me was how I got the kids, my report, not these really great boards that I could never make because I'm not artistically inclined in that way. I think once I learned to accept me in those different areas, I became more at peace, and then I can just do my job like so well, because I wasn't comparing myself to somebody else. I wasn't like, well, I wish I could have, well, I didn't do that and I should do that. I just compared myself to me. And if I was a better teacher than I was last year, yay. If I was a better researcher than I was last year, yay. Better clinician than I was the year before, yay. So when I thought about this, and I thought about the person, it was really hard. But the person that just kept coming to mind was my mother. She's a powerhouse. She just lives her truth. She just is who she is. She's a wonderful person, but be careful if you get into any kind of debate with her, because she will ask the questions and make you think. And she is someone that I think about, that she is just living. She's 75. She'll be 76 next week, and she just lives in her truth, and she's just accepted who she is, and no qualms about it.
Excellent. I mean, that's oftentimes exactly the people that are closest to you give you your best models, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
ideally, hopefully we
yeah,
have people in
yeah,
our real lives that do it. So
yeah.
again, cheers to you. Thank you so much for joining
Thank you for having
me
me. This was
today.
great. It was good talking to you. I don't even know how many questions we got to, but
I was
it was a
going
great
to
conversation.
say, right, exactly. We talked a lot, and sometimes, what your nuggets of information and insight and perspectives, and frankly, clarity for,
Mm,
kind of honing in on what you're doing, how you're, frankly, your strengths, your
mm.
vision, your leadership, and of course, your work. So thank you so much for, reinforcing and also clarifying and upgrading and all the things for us so that we can hear it. And the truth is, of course, because of my glitchy interwebs, I'm hoping that we were able to, get some people that could hear us in this discussion. And I know that there's certain people that consistently watch and have, we're shouting you out in online in the advertisement that I did manage to put out there. But
Okay,
the point is,
good.
for now, I know it is good. We did well, as you said. And thank you again for taking this time to chat with me and spend before do whatever next that you have on your agenda, as far as the many things that you have to do. So I appreciate you. Look forward to talking to you, of course, in the future, and maybe sharing a real, so to speak, cup of coffee slash tea, or maybe even a stronger
Sure.
adult beverage
I'm up for
um,
that as well. Yes.
next time I see you. All right, take care, and thank you. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
And I am going to screen share one last thing to make sure.